Okay, I think I'm live. Are you out there, people? Let me see. And now I am lost again. Now I'm going back to live streaming. And if you're out there and you're watching this, would you, using the chat box, introduce yourself, say your name and where you are watching from, and your role. If you want to share that, you can share that. And I'll be so grateful if you do that, because it's so disconcerting just talking to a green light. But I'm really excited about this first live YouTube event ever. My 14-year-old child just told me to make sure that I don't act like, ooh, I've never done this before. What am I doing? And ooh, what's that? My advisor. But I have never done one of these before. And it is both exciting and nerve-wracking. And all of that feels very appropriate because the topic of this live chat, the topic is around emotions and understanding emotions. So it's quite all right for me to be having them, including that sort of jittery excitement of trying something new and being nervous and will it work? But if you are out there, I also want to know that this is working. And right now, okay, I need to put on all messages. And Jessie says, I'm here. And that is good. Okay, yeah, we're still figuring out some of the technology here. Is anybody else out there? I see 2 people are watching. Lori, hi Lori. Lori's here too. That's so nice when I see names and they're people I know. I mean, I can see your little tiny face in there in the YouTube circle, but I also know who you are, what you look like, which is nice because otherwise, I wonder how the breakdown between introverts and extroverts happens in terms of comfort with things like this, because this is both really weird but also kind of nice because it's just me and the green light and sort of in theory, in abstraction. I know that you're all out there. It's 2:31 where I am, and so that means I am 3 hours behind Pacific time, which means I think there's only one place in the United States where that is the case, and I am in Hawaii. I'm on the beautiful green island of Kauai, which is the wettest place on Earth, or it has the wettest point on Earth. This is my son's spring break, and we are here in a place that we have spent quite a bit of time in and love, and it has been raining and raining and raining and raining. I'm going to give this just a couple more minutes, and then I'm going to get started with my agenda, because of course I have an agenda and some time frames around what is going to happen here. Now it says there's 4 people watching. If you just joined us, would you introduce yourself using the chat box? Perhaps share your name and where you are watching from. And if you want, you can share your role. If you are a coach or a teacher, teacher leader, administrator, you can define your role, or you cannot share it. And as I have said and been rambling on about for a few minutes now, because that's what you do in a YouTube Live, this is the first YouTube Live event for Onward, which is my book baby that is coming out in like 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks. I should hold it in my arms, and I'm so excited for this book to come into the world, which is why we are welcoming it with some new kinds of celebrations and sharings and offerings. And again, if you just joined us, I'm so happy that you're here, and I would love it if you would introduce yourself in the chat box. Just say perhaps just your name and where you are watching from, and about 1 more minute and I will get started. Oh, there's so many exciting things that I want to share with you today about Onward, and I've had to focus and narrow and figure out exactly what to share. This live event will probably go on about half an hour, and we've got some more events coming up in upcoming weeks. Those will be similar or video next Wednesday, April 18th. Mark your calendars, 5:30 Pacific time, another YouTube live event. And then on April 24th, there'll be a video up. It won't be live, but it'll be up. And the big event, the one that I hope y'all will join me for, will be May 1st at 5:30 p.m. Pacific time, when I will host a virtual book release party. I almost said I keep thinking my books like my babies, but it's not a baby shower, or baby welcoming. It is a book launch, because by May 1st, Onward will be out and in my hands, and in your hands too. If you have ordered it or pre-ordered it, you can still pre-order it. The actual release date that my publisher said, the date that it'll ship from their warehouse, is a bit earlier than May 1st, and so we may all have it in our hands, I think April 24, 25, 26, perhaps. Now there are 6 people watching, and so please introduce yourselves. If you're out there, you can use the chat box. We can see the chats. I can see the chats. Thank you, Jessie and Lori. And so I am going to jump into the content for today, because that's what you all are here for. And thank you again so much for being here. This is exciting. So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to do a little bit of sort of introduction, sharing, framing around this event and Onward, and then we're going to jump into some content around understanding emotions. And that's the focus, the topic, the content for this evening. And then we'll have a little bit of time for questions, and we'll see what happens. I don't know. I hope that there can be some discussion, some dialogue. I have confessed that this is the first time I've done this, and it is both fun and exciting to try something new and a little nerve-wracking. And now I can see that there are 7 people watching. We've got someone else, Lori and Jessie, and we've got some other people joining. I can see the little chat box popping up. It's very exciting. Okay, so let me show you something. Back in the very end of the 1960s, I was born when there were only about 20 days left of the 1960s, but still I like to say that I was born in the 60s. And this was probably one of the first times they'd ever used the self-timer on the camera, posing in the old-fashioned film. The reason I'm sharing this photo with you is because Onward, which, as I've said several times now, is coming out in a couple of weeks, it feels like the book I was born to write. It feels like, gosh, I feel sheepish saying it, but it feels like the reason I am here. And so when I look at this photo and I just sort of think about what would happen with that baby, what that baby's purpose is in life, was Onward. Onward, it feels like what I am here to do. And that is because this book combines really the 2 topics or themes, conversations that I most want to be having in the world and with educators right now. And those 2 themes are, one, about emotional resilience, and the second theme is around educational equity. And for many years, I've been in conversations around educational equity, and also some around emotions and resilience. But those conversations have always seemed completely separate from each other, really disparate. And I have had a hard time ever thinking about or talking about one without also talking about or wanting to talk about the other. How do we talk about building equitable schools without also addressing, naming, exploring, bringing in emotions? It's impossible. And I think, sadly, that many very well thought out efforts to build equitable schools have been undermined because we haven't thought about, talked about, incorporated, used emotions. Similarly, when I've been in conversations about social emotional learning for kids or even for adults, those too have been divorced from a conversation about equity. And Onward brings those together for me. I'm just seeing other people joining us. I just glanced down at the chats. Hi, Janet. I'm so glad you're here. So this book, this conversation is, for me, it's a movement. It's the beginning of a movement to bring those discussions together and to actually do some things that will be of benefit to our students as well as to ourselves. So let me ask you a question. Based on what I just shared, based on what you have heard or what you know about Onward, what is drawing you to this conversation, to this book? What do you see as the potential benefits for you, your schools, the communities you serve? And I would love it if you might share a reflection or two, again, using the chat box. It'll just make me feel a little bit more like we're in community, like there's someone at the end of this green dot. Let's keep looking into the green dot. I'm sharing a quote right now for you by someone I consider to be a tremendous teacher. And my invitation for you to share a comment in the chat box connects to this, because we have our in-person communities, but I also think a lot about how do we create virtual communities that help sustain us, or when we're not in a space close by, physically in proximity to others. Did I just share? Oh, I think I'm sure I see what's happening. I'm sharing my screen with you. Okay, because I was just reading Jesse's. We can see. There we go. Okay. Okay, I'm learning. I was reading your comments because now I realize I can't. I have to switch out of this view so I can read your comments. So let me switch. Let's go back to me, and then I can go over. And now I'm reading Jesse's comment. There's that saying that you can't pour from an empty cup, and building my own resilience can help me process emotions and do the same with and for others. And Janet has also commented, hi folks who've just joined us. I can see that there's more people watching now, and welcome. And if you'd like to introduce yourself and say who you are, perhaps where you're watching from, that would be great. And I've just asked folks if they're willing to share what draws you to this work around emotional resilience. What's bringing you to this this conversation, this book? And yes, if we are coaches, then coaching around emotions comes up all the time. It's really hard to coach teachers or leaders or anybody without skills around coaching and knowledge around coaching emotions. And Lori's also commenting around what might be possible for new teachers with more understanding, more foundation of navigating the joys and challenges of the profession, which is, I was first drawn to exploring emotional resilience because of the high turnover rates I saw in my schools and district, and that really distressed me. So we are going to shift into the sort of content of this conversation around understanding emotions. And Onward is structured around the 12 habits that cultivate emotional resilience in educators. 12 chapters, each around one habit. Chapter 2 is called Understanding Emotions. And it might in some ways be the most important, essential habit. If I don't know, probably whichever chapter I talk to you about, I'm going to tell you that's the most important one. But actually there's probably 4 that are top most important habits, and understanding emotions is definitely up there at the top. Let's start with something that I find myself saying over and over and over, and seeing a lot of heads nodding when I share it, which is one of the reasons that we need to talk about emotions, read this chapter, discuss them with our colleagues, is that we have them. We have emotions. And it is our human right to explore those, to express them, to share them, to discuss them. We've suppressed our emotions for a long time. We've been told that they don't belong in the workplace, leave them at the door, and that's just, not only is it unrealistic, but it's not necessary, because emotions can be our friends. Emotions have been perceived, talked about, thought about as these behaviors that are out of control that we need to suppress and stuff down, that get in the way. But often what happens is by doing that, we actually create more challenges and problems in the secondary behaviors and emotions that come up from suppressing your emotions. But the other thing that we've overlooked is that we have missed opportunities to draw energy, strength, support, motivation, inspiration from our emotions. We can use our emotions, again, not only so that we can have more joyful lives for ourselves, but to serve the communities that we have chosen to be in service of, to serve our students, to serve teachers if you're a coach. And so we need to start talking about emotions. This book is about cultivating resilience. It's not about emotional intelligence. The conversation doesn't end there. It's about building resilience. And resilience, quickly defined, is the bounce in your step. It's how you respond to challenge and adversity, how you bounce back, and how you thrive in spite of challenges and adversity, how each setback actually catapults you forward so that you are stronger after the setback, so that you're better able to deal with the next challenge. That's resilience. And that's what we want to think about cultivating for ourselves, because life is challenging. We're not going to get through it without some setbacks, and so that we can fulfill our purpose in life, or perhaps our purpose as educators that we have opted into, that we've selected. So burnout, let me just tell you what that is. It's really relevant to our discussion. Burnout is the inability to perceive or experience positive emotions. Burnout basically happens when you can't tap into, surface, experience calm, tranquility, joy, satisfaction, fulfillment. So when we're cultivating resilience, we want to think about not only how to learn some skills for managing the challenging or uncomfortable emotions. Notice that I'm not saying the bad or negative emotions, but the ones that make us feel challenged or uncomfortable. We want to learn some ways to engage with those, and we also want to figure out how to increase our experience of the positive and neutral emotions that we have. So to do all of that, we actually need to understand a little bit more about what emotions are. And I'm going to show you something so that you can get an insight into what emotions are. So if you take a moment and you think to yourself, like, what is an emotion? How would you even describe an emotion? When I first started doing this research on emotional resilience, that was one of the first questions I spent some time trying to wrap my head around. and actually trying to define. I really like to define terms and get specificity. What is an emotion? I knew that I felt emotions, but it was sort of, they were like, are they thoughts? They're things you think? Are they physical experiences? Because I knew that when I felt really angry, my hands trembled, my breathing shallowed. But how do you describe an emotion? Well, so I did a little research and went exploring. What is an emotion? Turns out an emotion is a cycle. This will be in Onward and in the accompanying workbook. Let me just make sure. Let me share my screen with you. In case you don't know, Onward, I feel like I'm having twins because here's Onward. And since you're here, let me just tell you, that cover, I love the cover. What is depicted on that cover is a cenote, which is a subterranean cave that is full of natural spring water. And cenotes are found, they're actually found all over the world, but many of them are found in the Yucatan Peninsula. And I visited the Yucatan Peninsula about 15 years ago and swam in one of these cenotes. And outside it's hot and it's dry, and you go inside and it's lush and tropical, and the water is perfect. And these are actually seen by the Mayas, both the ancient Maya and the ones who currently live in the Yucatan Peninsula, as sacred places in between worlds. And they still tend to these places, take care of them, because they are believed to be these sources of perhaps connection with another world, strength, energy. I just think they're absolutely beautiful and peaceful, and the metaphor of a reservoir that we have within ourselves that is filled in many different ways, but that we can also fill, we can contribute to, and that's what the book is about. And as I said, I feel like I'm having twins because I know you're seeing a little bit of funky text there, because there's also an accompanying workbook. Because when I wrote Onward, my initial plan was for there to be a lot of like, okay, here's the idea, here's the theory, this is the brain science, and this is how you do it. I'm a coach, more than anything. I'm a coach. I will forever be a coach, which means helping people to develop different behaviors, different skill sets. And the workbook will help you do that. Now, here's what an emotion is. This is what I'm so excited to share with you. This was the biggest epiphany when I was researching and writing this book, which was understanding what an emotion is and then how to engage with them. So, start right here. The first experience that begins an emotional cycle, that begins an emotion, is an event. And here I've given you the example of a student rolling her eyes at you. That's the event. Events will always happen in our lives. Then we interpret that event. And we might say, that's a sign of disrespect, that eye rolling. That student is so rude to me, and I have to maintain high standards of behavior. Interpretation is step 2 in the cycle of an emotion, in the definition of an emotion. Then step 3 is we have a physical response. That's when our hands might tremble, our breathing gets shallow, we might start sweating, we might notice that our mouth feels dry. We have a physical response to our interpretation. Okay, then you have the urge to act. You might want to curse at the student. You might feel like just turning and rolling your eyes. You want to do something. There's a difference between what you want to do and step 5, which is what you actually do. And so do you write her a referral and send her out to the office? Which can lead to step 6, which are the after effects. How do you feel? What's the secondary emotional cycle that comes as a result of the actions that you took? So perhaps you feel guilty because you know you send that student out a lot and you know you shouldn't be triggered. And that prompts a whole new cycle of feeling guilt, feeling perhaps inadequate. I don't know how to manage my classroom. And around we go. And so this visual that you're seeing, as well as a whole bunch related to this, will be available very soon on our Onward website, which is called Onward the Book. there's a placeholder thing right there now, but May 1st, it's going to be beautiful and populated and all full of additional resources. But there'll be this actually looking even a little nicer, and there'll be some tools for you to use to understand your own cycles of emotion. That will be up there soon. So I'm going to switch you back now to whole screen. So, yes, Lori, there's a workbook. So the workbook, I'm just reading Lori's comment. The workbook has 365 activities, one for every day of the year, because building our resilience is going to be a project. And I'm hoping that some of those activities are going to be ones that you're going to start wanting to do all the time or several times a week. And perhaps others will be ones that you do once or twice. And my dream, my fantasy, yes, I have emotional resilience fantasies, is that actually that people will use the workbook and read the book together in teams with colleagues, perhaps even a whole school. That's my dream, is a whole school or a whole district will read the book, use the workbook together, and engage in the learning together, because I know we're much better if we learn together. So yes, the workbook. Okay, jumping back, the cycle of emotion. This is a really important thing I needed to tell you. Here's where you cultivate resilience. Can you see where my little cursor is jiggling? I should make a nice big red arrow. In between the event and the interpretation, it's right there. That's why this is such an epiphany. That's why this is such essential, key, useful information. And I know that some of you have heard this from me before, and I keep coming back to it again and again and again all the time. Like the prompting event might be that, somebody doesn't do the dishes. And my interpretation of that is going to trigger a whole emotional experience. And so right there in that space is choice. That's where my agency lies. That's where choice lies. That's where perhaps my freedom lies. That's where my resilience lies. Which doesn't mean that we have to have a rosy attitude about everything at all. But it does mean that we can create some interpretations that give us more power and that help us have additional resources and ideas about what to do and how to respond to challenges. So that is the little snippet, the taste I wanted to share with you about understanding emotions and the connection between that and resilience. I want to see if some of you have any questions. You can ask them about, I guess you can ask them about anything in general. The lovely feature here is that I can read your questions and I can decide which ones I want to answer. But if you have questions about understanding emotions, coaching around emotions, emotional resilience, you are welcome to ask those. Type them into the chat box. And to all of you who joined us since I started talking, because I can see there's some other folks watching, feel free to introduce yourself if you want, or just ask a question. Oh, see, now I know I'm waiting, but I'm also noticing because of the time lag, in a moment you're going to see me just sitting here and staring and waiting. And I'm not going to wait too long. I'm figuring this out here. Yeah, so I'm reading Janet's comment about the new teachers that she coaches need the empowerment. I share that cycle of emotions with people I'm coaching all the time. I keep copies of it. I have one that doesn't have the interpretation in there, and so it's just blank. And I share that with them all the time, and often have people who are really grateful for that kind of understanding. It's like, it's on paper. There's 6 steps. There's a cycle. There's arrows. It also helps that kind of a resource. Using that cycle helps people distance themselves a little bit from the drama of the emotion and helps them have some perspective. And Jesse's asking a question, what about when people can't identify the emotion they're experiencing? How do you help people when they can't identify the emotion? Which is very common. I would say the first thing to do is just give them some space to start talking and sharing anything that's coming to mind. We can talk about, some people might be able to start talking about an emotion in the way that they're physically experiencing it, talking about, I don't know what I'm feeling, but I'm feeling tightness in my stomach or my throat, or I just feel so frustrated. There's another tool that you can actually download from my website now. You can find it on many of my blogs that I've written, that is the core emotions. And there's two sides to it. Lots and lots of words to describe emotions. And that can be really helpful because it just gives people a map. It gives them some language. They're categorized into 8 groups. So for example, one of those core emotions is anger. And then below that, in this document that I'm referring to, there are lots of synonyms, essentially, for anger, different experiences of anger along a spectrum of intensity. That can be really helpful. Asking people if they can't identify the emotion, that's okay. In some ways, if we just talk about the cycle of an emotion, we don't need to give concrete names to it. We can talk about, there's the thing that happened, and then the question is, how did you interpret it? And that's where people will often find more language, and they'll say, well, I just think that she shouldn't do that. I think that that's really disrespectful. Interesting to pay attention to when people use the word I think when they're talking about an emotion, when they're talking about trying to get closer to feelings. And that's when, as coaches, we can use some of the strategies that we're good at, such as paraphrasing or using active listening, to help reflect back what we're hearing and to help people clarify. So sometimes I've said to someone, it sounds like you're really frustrated. And the person with whom I've been talking would say something like, well, no, actually, I'm not frustrated. I'm just really sad. And that's gotten them somewhere. That's some clarity. So using some of those coaching strategies. Anyone have any other questions you want to ask? I'll give you all just another minute. All right, those of you who have joined us today, I'm so grateful that you've been here. As I shared in the beginning, this is the first time I've done a YouTube live experience, and it's been really fun and a great experience. And if you have any final thoughts or questions or feedback, I'm always happy to hear those. Always happy for feedback. Lori did just ask a question, and she said, does mindfulness play a role at all in coaching emotions? And my answer is mindfulness plays a huge role in cultivating emotional resilience. It is actually chapter 4 of Onward is called Be Here Now, and it is all about how to cultivate mindfulness, which is non-judgmental awareness of whatever is happening in that moment. And so often something happens and we quickly respond and react and place judgment on whatever has happened. So it could be something simple like, my principal passed me in the hallway and he, said hello, but he didn't say anything else. And immediately in our interpretation, we're thinking something's wrong. I've done something wrong. Mindfulness is about refraining from moving to that judgment and perhaps just staying with my principal passed me in the hall and he said these words without interpretation, without judgment. Mindfulness plays a huge role in chapter 4. I am making a big case for everybody to sit down and meditate, and we'll see. That's I have in this book come out fully as somebody who highly values mindfulness and who practices mindfulness and who has for many years. And although in my previous books I sort of allude to that sometimes, I've never been as direct and clear as I am in Onward, because I do think it is absolutely an essential skill set for us to practice and acquire. So y'all, with that, I'm going to, again, share the cover of this book because I'm just so excited. It's so weird. It feels like books kind of feel like they come through me, but they are not mine. I just am sort of a host to the process. I'm actually sitting in a place where I wrote 2 chapters of Onward. I mentioned in the beginning that I am in Kauai this week. It's my son's spring break, and I'm in a place that I've stayed several times that I just love. I love being here. I love the temperature. I love the humidity in the tropics and the ocean. And I wrote 2 chapters of Onward, sitting at the very table that I'm sitting at right now. Sometimes I write very early in the morning. I'm usually up when I'm in a writing spree, I'm up and writing by 4:30 or 5. And sometimes I feel like I just come to my computer and I put my fingers on the keys, and then the words come out and the message is there. And particularly for those chapters of Onward, they just kind of came out. So thank you so much. Oops, wait, I don't want to do that yet. Thank you so much for joining us here. And I hope that I will see you again next week. Let me make sure to give you that correct date and time again. I hope that I get to see you next week, and it will be on Wednesday, April 18th, 5:30 Pacific time, and we'll be sharing that again. And have a wonderful rest of your evening, everybody, and thanks again for joining us.